Jack Smith had never seen such a thing. He did not know what kind of messages these signal flares were sending. However, the mercenaries had a horrified expression on their faces. Upon seeing the signal flare, they knew that something major was going to happen. It was a signal flare specifically used by the military. This is not good. Mr. Garrison, we need to retreat as soon as possible. The head of the mercenary reported to Rick. However, Rick, who was inexperienced in this aspect, could not understand what he meant. Why should we retreat? We have yet to find out what exactly is happening. Rick responded coldly. Then we will retreat. We do not want the money anymore. The mercenaries knew what the signal flare represented. Thus, they wanted to retreat and leave. It was not necessary for them to risk their lives for money. Boom! Just when they were about to retreat, there was a sudden movement of the earth, and the ground under everyone's feet moved. All of them clearly saw the sand and stones tumbling and shaking under their feet. The vibrations became more intense and violent. Some people were unsteady and could not remain standing. It felt as though a giant earthquake was approaching. The mercenaries bent down slowly and placed their ears on the ground to listen. In an instant, their facial expressions changed. This vibration is too loud. In the past, they had experienced being surrounded by hundreds of enemy mercenaries on the barren battlefield, and the vibration then was loud enough. However, based on the current vibration and their previous experiences, the scale was much greater than they had encountered. It would be a rough estimate of about 100,000 people on the battlefield. 100,000 people? What kind of concept is this? He was unable to imagine it. Buzz, buzz, buzz. This time, there were bursts of low buzzing sounds in the air. Everyone looked up and was shocked to see small planes hovering in the sky. They could already feel the impending storm. What was worst was seeing these planes lining up in formation and flying around in groups, circling the sky above. Everyone was counting the number of planes in the sky. There were at least hundreds of them. Not only that, there were hundreds of helicopters dominating the lower airspace as well. They were densely packed and covered the entire sky for miles. The sky became dark and nobody could see a thing. The sheer number of these planes had completely covered the sun, blocking out all the sunlight. There was the sudden arrival of dozens of huge transport planes aimlessly hovering in the air. Boom, boom, boom. The ground below them was shaking violently. Many people were unsteady on their feet. Look! Someone standing on the outermost circle shouted, leading everyone to look behind. A few colossal objects appeared in their line of vision. When they finally saw them clearly, everyone's faces had already grown pale. They were all in complete shock. The colossal objects were a line of war chariots and battle tanks. They came in from all four directions. The mercenaries estimated the number to be at least a few thousand. It is an epic battle scene. Look! Everyone saw the infantry among the war chariots. There were so many of them, densely packed together, and they could barely see their individual heads. Click, click, click. The formation of battle tanks was followed by a large infantry. They came at a uniform, world-shaking pace. There are 4 columns in one regiment. As a rough estimate, we can see 20 groups. We can see about 20,000 people. But it is just a small portion. There are a lot more at the back. The main army. The mercenaries analyzed the situation using their professional expertise. What? You can already see 20,000 people from here? Aren't there still at least thousands of tanks and armored vehicles? And thousands of airplanes and helicopters? After hearing the shocking numbers, Jack Smith, Bob and the others were about to explode in fright. This was definitely not something they could handle, let alone compete. Why are we here? Why can't we just live our lives comfortably? These gangsters and their subordinates trembled in fear. Their legs grew weak, and they almost fainted. They thought that they were only here to fight. Was there a need for airplanes, tanks, and artillery with tens of thousands of troops? The Garrison family saw what was happening. A chilly stream of air rushed up to their bodies as if to freeze all the blood in them. This is frightening. Why are there troops here all of a sudden? How did this happen? What on earth is happening? Rick grew extremely solemn. He was extremely afraid that things were happening accordingly to what he had initially predicted. Jack Smith thought about it and said, could it be a military exercise? This area is extremely suitable for it. Joseph took a few deep breaths. I also think the same way. I received a piece of news in the morning, saying that there are many tanks heading in this direction. It seems to be a military exercise going on, and we just happened to chance upon it. We seem to be in their way. Instead of thinking of the worst-case scenario, everyone wished to believe that it was a simple military exercise. Rick shook his head. Perhaps not. This has definitely got to do with Levi. All are loaded standard weapons. They have bullets in them. These are real guns and live ammunition. I guarantee it. The head of the mercenary, James, said in a serious tone. His experience, together with his subordinates, were able to see clearly that the guards had real guns and live ammunition. Many people drew in their breaths at that instant. They were panicking. Boom, boom, boom. The war chariots and armored vehicles stopped one by one when they were about 500 meters away from everyone. However, the infantry at the back passed by the war chariots and armored vehicles and continued to advance. It was a bone-chilling sight. There were a lot of people on the vast plain. Click, click, click. The infantry was approaching, closer each time, and now everyone had a better view of the sheer number of them. Just now, we only saw a small part of the infantry. Now, the numbers have increased. We can see at least 40,000 to 50,000 people. There is about the same number of people at the back. Tell everyone this piece of bad news. There are about 100,000 people in strength. James stated the fact, and he was growing desperate and hopeless at reality. An infantry of such magnitude would absolutely sweep every single person on the battlefield away. With this fact in mind, everyone grew dead silent and despondent. There are 100,000 people. A full 100,000. I. Jack Smith was so scared that his teeth chattered in fear, rendering him speechless for a long time. The infantry stopped at a distance of fewer than 20 meters from everyone, which was a good distance for their handover process. These soldiers looked ruthless, holding tightly onto their weapons that had been loaded, and took aim at everyone. There was no doubt that as long as they fired their weapons, the Garrison family, Jack Smith and the others would be brought down immediately. In front of all these soldiers, they had no fighting power at all when they saw a series of cold muzzles pointed at them. Plop! 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 They dropped their weapons on the ground and raised their hands up in surrender. They would not even think about putting up a fight. There were at least 100,000 soldiers around. Many of them regretted it in their hearts. Why did they join the underground world of all things? Seeing the army advancing towards them, Jack Smith and the other big shots grew afraid. The pearls that he had initially held in his hands went missing. The others, like Smiling Buddha and Bob, felt their blood pressure rising. If not because there were people supporting them, they would have fainted and collapsed onto the ground. The Invincible 13 had also grown pale in shock. They did not even dare to lift their heads. Joseph was so afraid that he almost coughed out blood. The muzzles were directly pointed at them, so one more step from the soldiers would mean that the muzzles were about to come in contact with their brains. It was extremely terrifying. The mercenaries really hated Rick to the core. If they knew that this was going to happen, they wouldn't have been lured here by the handsome reward. They would lose their lives anyway, so how could they spend the money? At this point in time, there were dozens of transport planes in the sky, and the cabin doors opened. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The paratroopers landed one at a time. Hundreds of helicopters also moved in the sky, circling above Joseph and the others. Everyone was able to see clearly that there was a famous sniper in the helicopter, and the sniper's rifle was aiming at them. There were even machine guns facing them, with their angles adjusted. The paratroopers descended continuously from dozens of transport planes. After landing, they turned their backs to Levi in a half-squatting posture and faced the Garrison family with their weapons aimed at them. There were thousands of paratroopers, and they all happened to be guarding the open space. Boom boom boom. There was some movement on the outer circle. The cannons were pushed out with their muzzles pointed towards the sky. However, the Garrison family, Jack Smith and the others knew that they were facing another layer of doom. They were surrounded at all sides, and the large weapons and battle tanks with guns had driven up so close to them. Even the helicopters in the sky were directed at them. They were completely surrounded this time round. There was no way they could escape from this. Frightening. Really frightening. The mercenary, James, and his counterparts were unable to withstand the pressure. They threw their weapons down, raised both their arms up in surrender, and said, "We were conned by the Garrison family. We did not do anything." And then they lay on the floor and placed both hands on their heads. They looked pathetic. After that, Jack Smith responded and pointed at the Garrison family immediately. "Everything is done by the Garrison family. They invited us here, saying that they have a project that is worth $2 billion. We are so clueless. We did not know. We are in the wrong. We are in the wrong." After saying so, Jack Smith and the other big shots followed what James did. They lay down on the ground and placed hands on their heads. Plop. Plop. Soon, all their subordinates followed suit. They also lay on the ground and placed their hands behind their heads. One after another. Following this, all the security personnel, bodyguards, guards and the mercenaries hired by the Garrison family also lay down on the ground. All of them pushed all the blame to the Garrison family. In the blink of an eye, there were about 1,000 or so people surrendering. The only people left standing were the Garrison family members, Holly and the others. They looked right and left to see and realized that they had two choices. They could either continue to have the gun muzzles pointed at their heads, or lie on the ground like what the rest were doing. They had no choice but to lie on the ground. Levi shouted from afar, "Joseph?" Upon hearing his name being called, Joseph grew so frightened. His whole body was cold and sweaty, and his face looked so pale as though he was seriously ill. He looked helplessly at Levi, who was standing not too far away. "Ben? Winnie? Jacob? Rick? Brian? Holly?" Levi looked at the Garrison family members and called their names out one by one. They did not dare to say a thing to Levi. It was because when Levi yelled out their names, it felt like he was declaring their deaths. Everyone stared at Levi blankly. They did not know what he was going to do. Everyone was utterly confused and was in complete shock. Levi placed his hands on his back and shouted at everyone in the Garrison family, "Haven't all of you been guessing what my trump card is? I am telling you now. This is my trump card. This magnificent army with thousands of men and weapons is my trump card. Levi continued yelling. The Garrison family became deathly still after hearing what Levi said. Rick closed his eyes in despair. Things had actually turned out exactly the way he had guessed. Holly froze, and her teeth could not stop chattering. At this moment, there was a path created from the outer circle, surrounded by the crowd. A middle-aged man with 2 stars on his shoulder quickly walked towards the cemetery. King of War. He is the King of War. The Garrison family was in shock as all of their facial expressions changed drastically. Everyone directed their gazes at the King of War walking towards the cemetery. They saw the King of War approach Levi and greet him respectfully. Northampton's Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, Garfield Perkins, is here to report to the Chief. The assembly of the First Army is complete, Chief. Please give further instructions. Many people could not believe their eyes upon witnessing this scene. It was indescribable. He was the King of War with 100,000 guards under his charge, yet he actually addressed Levi as his chief? Who on earth is he? Oh my God. It is unimaginable. This was a huge shock to the Garrison family. They did not expect to see this. Thus, they could not accept the fact. Rick shut his eyes tightly. Garfield's action had cemented the thoughts in his head. Levi is the one. All right, fire the cannons. Levi commanded. Garfield waved his hand, and at that moment, dozens of cannons fired their shots at once. Boom! The cannons fired, shaking the earth like thunderbolts. Mr. Morris, rest in peace. 100,000 soldiers shouted in unison. The voices of 100,000 soldiers sounded like thunder. It was a totally earth-shattering sight to behold. Rowan and his wife cried again. Levi had given Morris the best, most respectful, and most impressive send-off. Levi faced Morris grave and said emotionally, "My brother, this is your belated send-off." After everything was done, Levi turned around slowly. At this moment, Azure Dragon and the others had changed into their military uniforms. Each one of them had a star on their shoulders. The 5 Great Wars Regiment. Azure Dragon held a set of military uniform and brought it to Levi. Respectfully. The Phoenix King of War helped Levi to change out of his black suit and into the military uniform. After changing into the military uniform, Garfield and the other soldiers looked at Levi in awe. Standing in front of them was their leader of indomitable military spirit. He was their role model, the legendary god of war of Erudia. There was a total of 5 stars on Levi's shoulder. He was the only god of war with 5 stars in the whole of Erudia's history. At this sight, Rick had already fainted. Levi's imposing demeanor was unmatched. He stared at the Garrison family with indifference and said, "Do you still remember the day you listed your company on the stock market?" The god of war said that he would attend the dinner banquet. That was right. Because I am the god of war. The Garrison family definitely remembered that they would hold a dinner banquet to celebrate the listing of their company. That day, the god of war had announced that he would come. That made the Garrison family excited, and they even thought that they would rise in fame and reputation. However, it was destroyed by Levi. The Garrison family then saw Levi as a sinner of their family. This was because Levi was the unlucky one who had disrupted their stroke of luck. After that, the Garrison family used all means and ways to seek connection with the god of war but was subsequently rejected. They were most puzzled by the fact that the god of war had come to the dinner banquet, but no one seemed to have noticed it. They finally understood it now. It was because Levi was the god of war. Why else would Levi cause such a huge commotion at the Garrison family's dinner banquet? Why did he give the Garrison family a month to make an official apology? Why did he warn the Garrison family time and again? Why did he have such confidence? Because he was the supreme god of war. Like what Melanie had said, the god of war was the commander-in-chief of the 9 war zones of Erudia, and he could destroy the entire family really easily. It was already too late. Everyone had only reacted when it was too late. Levi put on his military cap slowly and solemnly. After wiping it clean, he looked at the 100,000 soldiers in front of him. Upon seeing this, Garfield shouted, "God of War! God of War!" The entire army shouted that exciting title in unison. They all looked at Levi, who was the first person in Erudia who held on to such an impressive title. Their collective voices inspired awe throughout the empire. The Garrison family was also caught in fascination at this awe-inspiring sight. This man is Erudia's god of war. Just by his presence, everyone knew that with him around, Erudia would be protected and kept safe for thousands of years. Levi was firmly captured in the hearts of the millions of soldiers of Erudia. However, the Garrison family members were knee-deep in regret. This was because Levi used to be a part of the Garrison family. He had worked hard and fought hard for the Garrison family. However, the Garrison family had done so many cruel things to him, even forcing him to leave home. Levi's gaze landed slowly on the Garrison family members. Then he said mildly, "Did you expect this? The bastard that you thought should be eaten alive by wild dogs. Now I am someone you cannot even touch." Upon listening to him, the Garrison family were in shock. Levi looked at Joseph. "I was supposed to be your grandson, but now I am the commander-in-chief of the 9 war zones of Erudia with hundreds of thousands of soldiers under my command." Then, he turned to look at his adoptive parents. "I was supposed to be your son, but now I am formidable enough to be worshipped by everyone." Next, he glanced at Brian and Victoria and said, "I was supposed to be your little brother, but now I have the power and wealth to hold everything under my control." Finally, he gazed at Holly and said, "I was supposed to be your husband's friend, but now there is no one else controlling me but myself." Levi's voice was like a knife slicing into the hearts of everyone. At this moment, everyone no longer felt pain but numbness. They were all completely numbed in shock. None of them could feel the pain from their nails digging deep into their palms. What did they miss? It was unimaginable. Everyone's minds went a total blank. They were unable to think clearly on these matters. The Garrison family thought about it. If they had not dealt so harshly with Levi in the past, how would the Garrison family have prospered? Perhaps they would have taken control of Northampton overnight and became the only powerful family, right? Holly thought about it. If she had not treated Morris badly in the past, who would she have become? Her husband's brother was a powerful figure in Erudia. Perhaps she would have been the noblest woman in Northampton, right? However, there was no room for regrets. It was too late. They had to bear the painful consequences.